Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Nobody Asking Me Guy. Listen, guys, I'm your host, Melvin Casey Lars. You know how we do it here. We don't ask cookie cutter questions. We don't waste people's time pontificating on things that make no sense. We don't get into gossip and all that crazy kind of thing. We talk about life, live life, and things that occur, things that happen that affect us all in a positive and a negative manner. And guess what? We have a fantastic guest with us this evening, attorney Reverend Kris Watson, the founder of Nurturing Justice. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about Nurturing Justice and Nurturing Justice, and she'll talk more about it. But she's nationally certified trainer in the Sacred Conversation to End Racism curriculum of the United Church of Christ. She works with clergy and lay people nationally, the important work to dismantle racism. Reverend Kris currently serves as an associate minister, at Safe Haven UCC in Ridgewood, New York. She also serves as executive director of the Metropolitan Association, the New York Conference of the United Church of Christ. Reverend Kris is a graduate of Vassar College and the Fordham University School of Law, where she obtained her BA and doctorate of jurisprudence degrees. She served as an assistant district attorney in the New York County District Attorney's Office for several years before entering the private practice of law. Now, Reverend Kris holds a Master's of Divinity degree from the New York Theological Seminary. In addition to the practice of law, Reverend Kris is a nonprofit leader, organizational consultant, training consultant, and change manager. She has recently formed Nurturing Justice Incorporated, a nonprofit organization brings together a diversity of people whose desire to be part of a nurturing community that pursues justice and racial equality through education, support, and action. Nurturing Justice works tirelessly to dismantle the notion that there is a hierarchy of human value based on skin color through our education, regional transformation, action, community building, and engagement. Now, I know you find that as exciting as I do, and my audience, Dr. Reverend Attorney Kris, is a very diverse one, and they know how I am. They know how excited I get, and many times they get excited with me as well. So, guys, listen, you didn't come to hear me. You came to hear attorney Reverend Kris Watson of Nurturing Justice. Reverend Kris Watson, how are you this evening?
Thank you so much. I'm doing well, and thank you for having me. Delighted to be here with you, and just grateful to engage in conversation with you and your audience.
Well, listen, it's certainly our pleasure, and it's certainly my pleasure being able to sit and talk with a person that's as forward-thinking and as front-going and outreaching as you are. As you know, a lot of times people talk about situations, and once the conversation's over, I coined a phrase that I have not officially coined, but I say once the conversation's over, they're over. And that's not the case with Reverend Attorney Kris Watson
I hope
and
not.
the Nurturing Justice Program.
I hope
And
not.
we're just delighted. No, it's not. So listen, if you will, if you kind of walk us through a little bit, just some of the initial things that you're doing and what you're sharing, and we'll keep it moving.
Okay, so, well, Nurturing Justice is a national organization. We're a nonprofit organization, and we started back in 2021, but really in 2020, after the murder of George Floyd. A lot of people in the church circles that I traveled in, were interested in learning more about race and racism in America. And so we started, and we were, of course, in COVID lockdown. So we started doing virtual trainings and, forming groups around the country to educate people about the history of race and racism in America, and to really engage in some dialogue about, what was happening and how this evil persists to this day. So we had done so much work. I mean, literally, I was behind a Zoom screen like every day, all day, it seemed like, around the country, in the Southwest, in the East Coast, in the South. It was pretty amazing. And so because we had so many different kinds of people joining our groups, whether they were in the church or they were lay people, ministers, or even business people, I decided that I wanted to try to form a community of people who were engaged in the work and, studying the work and willing to engage in authentic and transparent dialogue. So I had the idea to start Nurturing Justice and it first just started as a collaborative exercise where we would bring all the people that we had worked with together every other week just to have discussion, to share resources, to build community around the country. And then it turned into more groups, more learning opportunities. And we expanded our mission. And so we're doing what we call relational transformation groups, where bring people together of different, and there's a group behind you, as you can see, different ethnicities, different races, different demographics to study together, to work together, to build community, and to learn together and to be authentic. Because our motto, basically, or what we are seeking to do, is to dismantle the notion that there's a hierarchy of human value based on skin color. And we know that this has been established forever in America and around the world. And we're trying to dismantle this notion. And by bringing people together in groups, people can get to see one another as fully human and understand that we all experience the same kinds of triggers and traumas, and that we all have human experiences that are traumatic, or that are, fraught with racial undertones, right? So, and whether you're talking about people who live in communities where they have no relationship with people of African descent or other people of color, or whether you're talking about people of African descent who daily experience the evil of racism, the violence, the terror, the apprehension. We bring them together so that they can hear one another and they can build relationship and see each other. And it's been extremely rewarding work. It's challenging, it's difficult, it's painful. And, a lot of times people experience shame around the issue of race and racism. But, we try to conduct our work in a non-judgmental way. We don't try to finger point or to cast blame or shame on people. We just say, look, racism is the air that we breathe in America. You cannot be born in this world, basically, without this notion that people of color and people of African descent are less than human. And we have to begin to see each other as fully human. We call racism a spiritual malformation. It impacts everybody that it touches, irrespective of your so-called race. And we try to teach people that race is a socio-political construct, that there really is no such thing as different races, right? I mean, that that humanity began on the African continent, and that we, migrated, and our pigmentation changed, but genetically speaking, from a DNA standpoint, we are no different from one another, right? So we really have to begin to dismantle that notion that there is some fundamental difference between us. And so we're doing the hard work, and we've expanded our work because the times call for it. We're now engaging in reproductive justice issues and looking at how society and the powers that be are trying to dismantle a woman's autonomous right to their control over their bodies. We are also, understanding that we need to work with children. So we've written 2 curriculum one for primarily Euro-descendant children, to begin to teach them what they're not being taught in their schools. And then another for African descendant and Latinx kids, to provide them a safe space to understand what's happening around them, why this racism exists, why they're targeted, why they're treated differently, why they're not learning their own history. And so we are expanding our work, and we're trying to offer some opportunities for women and Black women involved in racial justice initiatives to have some respite, to come together and bond and to fellowship and to rest, because rest is important in order to resist what we experience daily. And so, we're expanding a lot of our programming, and really grateful for the work that we're doing, because I meet so many different kinds of people and am able to experience, how their attitudes, how their own deeply embedded racism impacts them from a spiritual and, practical standpoint on a daily basis.
Wow. That's very powerful. Listen, let me throw a little curve in here.
Okay.
All of those beautiful things that you're sharing, I'm sitting here in awe and I'm embracing. And as I'm looking at the diverse picture behind me, I've always had a question for individuals that look like you and I. When I encounter people like Tim Scott and those individuals, when you and I mentioned him specifically, and Clarence Thomas and these gentlemen specifically, Candace Owens specifically, when do you often encounter individuals when you are trying to get the world to holistically understand that we are one people, that many times it may be people that look like us who have difficulty grasping that because they're, and I know this is a loaded question, they're so busy trying to defend actions of those that do not look like us as if it's not happening to them.
Right.
Do you encounter many people like that?
Well, yes, I do encounter many people like that. And, part of the evil, I believe, of white supremacist ideology and the brilliance of it is that it has convinced us, people of African descent, that the ideology of white supremacy is the right ideology. There, once you have so fully indoctrinated people into this notion that people with white skin are better or superior, and their ideals and their values are better and superior to those of people of African descent, and they benefit from buying into the white supremacist ideology. Then it's very difficult to help them to see that this ideology is harming them spiritually and materially in many ways, right? So, yes, I do encounter what I call it is white supremacy in blackface.
Yes.
And it's really painful.
It is.
It's a deeply colonized mentality that is very hard to uproot because it really is the air that we breathe. And part of the work that we do in groups, even with people of African descent that come into our groups, is to try to help them see that all of the ways in which they have been indoctrinated in this society have led them to the conclusion that this white supremacist ideology is the right ideology, and to get them to see how deeply colonized their thinking is. And, that racialized capitalism, for example, is the right system and that they should buy into it and they should do everything they can to promote it, even when they're being harmed by it. So it's even when they're really not benefiting, relatively speaking. Tim Scott is not in the 1%, right? So, they just don't really see how painful and how detrimental their attitudes and behaviors are to their people, and probably don't really care, because they deem themselves, because of their economic status, to be above that, right? Oh, race doesn't matter. Oh, slavery's over, get over it. All of the things that people say, oh, there's an opportunity for everyone. And all you have to do is pull yourself up by your bootstraps. It's a mentality. It's just adopting a mentality of the oppressor. And because the oppressor has done such a great job in indoctrinating us, I mean, really, they don't have to do anything more, really. I mean, now we just do it to ourselves.
Wow. That's a very powerful statement. And I'm so happy that I asked you that, because when we see this happening, unfortunately, and you've already said it, when it starts to permeate and get in the fabric of all of us, because we're affected by it. And it's insane to me. And if I could share with you briefly, but I just talked with a gentleman the other day, and he was talking about being a Trump supporter and about what is policy. And when I asked him, Okay, so what other policies? I get crickets.
Right.
I get, he says, oh, I don't vote politics. I vote, I say, so what other policies? Are you calling hatred policies? Are you calling MAGA, Make America Great? Who's America great again for? What's wrong with America? Or are you calling the fact that right now you look like me, but if you walk into a store, you will be the one that's following around the store,
Right.
not other, things like that. And so as you're sharing, that's so rich. Now, it wouldn't kind of change a little bit to, and by the way, let me warn you, I always call my white friends my less melanated brothers and sisters.
Right. Right. And they
So
are
we're
brothers and sisters.
so when we're dealing with our less melanated brothers and sisters, and when you're doing those trainings, do you meet a lot of opposition and a lot of excuse making, or is it more or less just quiet defiance? I guess is the word I'm looking for.
So a few things I want to just comment on what you said. When people talk about make America great again, I like to ask the question, when was America great? When was America that was founded on enslaved labor, that genocided an entire nation of people that were perfectly happy in their land, related to the land, having their own spirituality, having their own people, professionals and people who tended to the land, when and were genocided, was America great then? Was America great when it traveled over to Africa and brought people from Africa and kidnapped them, doctors, lawyers, chiefs, nurses, midwives, kidnapped them from their land and brought them here to till the land, to make the land profitable for them? Was that when America was great? When was America great? Was it great when they were lynching people of African descent and then cutting off parts of their bodies and keeping them as keepsakes and trophies for their lynching? Was it great during Jim Crow? Was it great during all of the riots and the mass killings all around the world, all around the country? When was America great? Was it great when they were pouring drugs into our country in the civil rights movement, in the 60s and the 70s and the 80s? Was it great? I mean, please tell me, when was it great? Make America Great Again is a slogan that is designed to basically say, let's make America white again. Let's make America beneficial to us again. Let's make America less equal. Let's make America unfair again. And not that it ever became fair, but let's just keep it unfair. So that's that. That's my comment on MAGA. Right? Well, with respect to the attitudes that what I experience in groups, especially when I'm working with people of European descent, is complete shock at the education that they're getting. The first thing is, why didn't I know this? Why didn't I know that all civilization started in Africa? Why didn't I hear about the great African civilizations that Henry Louis Gates talks about in his Great African Civilization story? Why didn't I know about the Tulsa race riot and all the ways in which once Black people were given their freedom, we destroyed their communities? Why didn't I know about Reconstruction and the greatness of African descendant people as they rose to positions of power in government? Why didn't I know about how drugs were poured into Black communities intentionally? Why didn't I understand about media and how media influences our attitudes and how they try to demonize people of African descent? Why didn't I know these things? Why have I been so blind to this? And why didn't the educational system teach me about the history of Black people in this country? And I experience a lot of sadness. They express a lot of sadness, a lot of remorse, anger, confusion at having been taught their history, confusion about, the doctrine of discovery and how the church are the architects of white supremacist ideology. They experience confusion about how the church perpetuates this white supremacist ideology through its institutions and its proclamations and its doctrines and its dogmas. It's and they experience confusion around all of the ways in which racism is codified and in our systems, in every single system, the criminal justice system, the banking system, the housing system, the healthcare system, you name a system, and racism is controlling it. And so in our groups, we learn about this, and we touch on it because there's so much to unpack. I had one woman say, well, it wasn't we did a 7-week session out in Wisconsin, and one woman commented, well, it wasn't long and it wasn't enough history. And I said, well, to try to unpack the history of people of African descent in 7 weeks is impossible. Get it. All of our contributions, all the ways in which we built this country, all of the ways in which racism rears its head in AI, in the digital era, in economics, in every system. So what we do is we try to tell people that we start you on a journey, and we hope that you will become curious, and not just curious about the facts and the history, but curious about how white supremacy lives in you, right, as a human being, and what you have to do to dismantle these deeply embedded values that are contrary to being fully human, to being a real person. It's like you're not a real person unless you understand how your actions and your thoughts and your behaviors and your attitudes impact other people who are real human beings. If you're a white woman walking down the street and you see a Black guy and you clutch your purse and you move to the other side of the street, do you understand how that hurts people, how hurtful that is? Just that one motion, that one attitude that, in your mind, you're seeing a person of African descent, particularly men, and you get scared. Why are you living in fear of a human being who probably has no intention of, even looking in your direction or hurting you in any way? So it's the reaction I get. Sometimes there's resistance, right? Sometimes there's like, no, especially from progressive people who consider themselves to be progressive white people, right? They think they don't have it until they start really digging into themselves. And then you see tears and you see anger and you see, hurt, but not hurt, not yet understanding how much hurt they may perpetrate just in their daily living, in the ways that they fail to react, or the ways that they do react, in a way that they're conditioned to react to people of African descent, because we're seen as less than human.
Mm-hmm. And that has always baffled me, just as a person, when any individual, regardless of, quote, race, creed, or color, unquote, have the audacity to say that he or she believes in God, the Bible, whatever we say. And it starts in Genesis, as you know, and go to Revelation. And they talk about God creating the earth, created man in his own image. You know the story.
Right.
All of these things. And I was asking some of my less melanated friends, said, so show me in the Bible, as you share that, where on Monday, God created, quote, white people. On Tuesday, he created Chinese people. On Wednesday,
right.
He created black. So show me where that is.
Right.
So when you guys, and just reference to your statement about trying to pretend like people are not human and, people come from apes, this, that, and the third. Okay, so then that means if I came from an ape, you came from an ape, right?
Right.
Then, so when you say things like that, and when you share that with us, and I know my audience is going to go crazy when they see this, is that those are the kind of things that I'm so happy that you're here sharing with us. And if I can ask a third question, when it comes to the, quote, middle of the roaders, if I may call them that, when it comes to the middle of the roaders, those individuals that say, I call the middle of the roaders about, oh, well, slavery is over, get over slavery, but they have no problem with these Civil War reenactments that happens annually. They have no problem with that.
Right.
Or they think that it's unjust to take down statues of Confederates. Well, that shows history. No. When you are trying to show a person that was so great he had to see over the city. So, but they have. That's why I call them middle of the roaders. But they still say they, I don't embrace racism, and I think it's wrong, etc. And I know you've touched that already. When you say, well, the tears come and the anger and that kind of thing. But I guess what I want to take you back to is, do you encounter those individuals more readily, or are they just kind of sparsely dispersed throughout the crowd?
Well, a lot of times,
Makes sense.
people are afraid to express when they come into the group. Sometimes they're afraid to express their, their deepest beliefs, right? Because they know they think that they're in a place that's not safe to express it. But I remember one group in particular where, and I was it was a rector of an Episcopalian church, and he, when we were talking about the Constitution and how deeply embedded white supremacy is in the Constitution. He's like, I'm just having a really hard time with this because I've always thought about my country as great. And I basically questioned him and I said, well, what's great about it, right? After you've learned all you've learned, what is so great about it? And, and I talked about the doctrine of discovery. I talked about the Constitution and 3/5 of human and so forth and so on, all of the ways in which our existence was minimized and denied, essentially. And I said, how is that great in light of, your value that all human beings have intrinsic value in the sight of the divine? And he sat back in his chair and he just started crying. And he's like, I'm just having and I said, it's indoctrination, right? So and he would never describe himself as someone who's racist, but this is what being in these groups helps people to really examine themselves, right? Because my belief is that until you root it all, I mean, it's great to be able to go stand on a picket line or to, give money to a cause or to do this or that. But really, we're not going to get rid of this thing until people see how deeply harmed they are by these attitudes and beliefs that are deeply embedded and ingrained and indoctrinated within them. But until you have the courage to have a high degree of self-awareness where you can begin to understand and see that this was drilled into you from the time you drew breath, right? That you can't help but feeling this because it's everywhere. It's not something that's like an isolated thing, like, oh, I can, I wouldn't even know how to compare or to give what kind of example to give you, but it's so deeply ingrained in everything that we do, everything that we see, every system that we engage with, and it's hidden in plain sight in many times, right? In many instances. So we can't see it, but until you can see it in yourself, then you're not going to be able to uproot it. Like, so I had one woman who has come to almost every group I've had, and she was talking about, she was driving down, she was driving in her car, and she saw the car in front of her had a bumper sticker that said Notre Dame. And so she made the automatic assumption that the person driving the car was probably a white guy, an Irish guy, right? Until she pulled up alongside the car and this big black guy was driving the car. And she's like, oh, there it is. There is my deeply embedded presumptive racism. That if he went to Notre Dame, if this person driving his car has a Notre Dame sticker, they have to be white. And that's the small catching. Those are the small things. I mean, it's not that big a deal, but what the big deal is that she recognized it in herself. I got it too. There it is. Like I grab my purse when I'm crossing the street, or if a person of African descent says, I can't wear my hair naturally because I need to have it straightened to be able to be acceptable in the workplace. There it is. That's you embracing white supremacist ideology without even knowing it. But it might have a very good reason, right? That this is, like the workplace culture and you want to fit in. But how much does our fitting in compromise? I asked the question, what have you sacrificed on the altar of whiteness? And I asked people of European descent, when did your people become white? Because white was just a definition that didn't, that happened much later, right? People, came over to this country and had their ethnic identities intact. The Irish, Italian, German, Norwegian, or whatever, and they didn't identify as white until the census started asking the question, or until they started understanding that becoming white put them in a certain socio-political category that was beneficial to them and their families. And then they stopped speaking Italian, they stopped speaking German, they started adapting and assimilating to this American culture that defines whiteness and then says it's very good. It's very good to be white and not so good to be Black.
Excellent. And which drives me to, and I won't keep you all day.
Okay.
Which drives me to my next question. I promise I won't keep you all day.
It's
because
okay.
this is
I can talk about this all day. This is my passion.
Okay. Again, I want to go to the flip side when it comes to us. When you are instructing, or just in life, when we have, and we've already talked about the Clarence Thomases and Scotts and
Right.
Owenses of the world, but those of us that for some reason can't get, and I know you've talked about indoctrination, and you just mentioned assimilation. It has been my experience. I want to ask this question because it's been my experience in talking with so many people that look like you and I, that quite frankly haven't even come close to achieving the quote American dream unquote. They continue to struggle academically, they continue to struggle financially, etc. But their conversation hinges still on the fact of attacking people that look like them and you and I, and embracing, and I don't know if I'm answering my own question or not, but embracing the white supremacy ideology.
Right.
Do you encounter many like that? Like that?
Well, I mean, what I yeah, they can't get it. No,
the indoctrination.
Well, yeah, it's really because it's very painful. When you recognize. I mean, I have one of my board members who's my the COO actually of Nurturing Justice, and she's behind you in the blue jean jacket. And she said, I just want to find out how quickly I can decolonize myself. Because, you cannot be born in this country and not have embraced this ideology. It's just that simple. And so, the challenge is to find a way, Jesus would say, to be in the world, but not of it, right? How can we be in this world that we know is permeated with where racism is the air that we breathe? And how can we decolonize? And it's not a destination, Melvin. It's a journey. It's a daily reprieve from accepting, the and embracing the culture that has done so much harm to us. But we still have to live, we still have to eat, we still have to work, we still have to pay our bills, we still have to do all of these things. And so, and even if we have not achieved, and most of us have not achieved the level of economic, security or status and so forth, education levels and so forth, and it's designed that way. That is by intentional design. And it's not going to change. I'm sorry to give that news. This society that is built on racialized capitalism is not going to change. The best I think that we can hope for is that we begin to chip away at these attitudes and beliefs within us, each of us, irrespective of how we define ourselves based on the color of our skin. And that we begin to see one another as fully human, and that we begin to try to engage in as much human flourishing and trying to seek to help each human being that we encounter to thrive as human beings and as spiritual beings. And it's really challenging. There's a lot of anger. There's a lot of fear. I think that a lot of this racism is based on two things: the economic imperative in racialized capitalistic society, and fear. And if you can just look at, any media source, anything that you read, advertisements, it's all based on fear and building stereotypes to maintain the fear. And fear Howard Thurman, who's a Christian mystic who walked with Dr. King, he said fear is one of the main hound dogs of hell. We really have to try to work to abandon this fear, to put aside our fear of one another. Jesus said it most in the Bible, fear not. That was one of the most one of the most prevalent things that he said, fear not. How do we walk through society without fearing one another? And how do we walk through society trying to see each other, irrespective of the color of our skin, our economic status, any other difference, our gender identification, our sexual orientation, our ability or differently abled status? How do we walk through the world and try to see each other as fully human and try to foster a sense of human flourishing? That's what Nurturing Justice tries to do, right? It tries to encourage at least getting people started on the journey towards dismantling all of those things within themselves and in society that would prevent them from being fully human. Like I said, we call racism a spiritual malformation. That's something that Ruby Sales quoted, right? And came up with. It's really important that we begin to dismiss. So we look at, begin to dismantle this notion of a hierarchy of human value. And we look at ourselves, we look at our systems, we give people opportunities to tell their stories, to tell how it is that they were, to see and to then recount how it is that they were acculturated to believe these things, and that they may not have even realized it. It might be so deeply embedded that they don't even realize it. But we encourage authenticity and a high degree of self-awareness, and it's important.
Wow, that's very powerful. Well, listen, you've been very gracious, and you've shared so much valuable information with us. Are there any parting words you'd like to leave us with?
Well, one of the things that I've been thinking about lately is that, racial justice initiatives are becoming less and less popular, right? Less and less, I have how do I put this? Once it's gone sort of out of the public sphere, right? Once there's not a George Floyd incident, when that goes off the scene, then you have, the uprising, and then it calms down because, it's just not the thing. And Empire tells you, well, now you need to focus on reproductive justice, or Empire tells you, now you need to focus on LGBTQ, but it's all related, because the granddaddy of all of this is anti-Black racism, truly. So I guess one of the things that I've been thinking is that we who are in this work have to continue to sound the bell, sound the alarm, ring the bell. We have to continue to strive and not get discouraged, right? I think we owe that to our ancestors. We have to continue to do the work, plug away at it, talk about how important it is, because it really is a spiritual malformation. And if we don't begin to uproot this within ourselves and in society, we'll always be less than fully human. So those are the parting words. I would also say, join a group. Contact me at Kris@nurturingjustice.org, and, come into a group. I try to do make opportunities for people to come in in an inexpensive way. It's not that expensive, but we do have to charge because we pay our facilitators. And we always do this work with not just African descendant facilitators or Euro descendant facilitators. We do it together. And it's important to try to do this work because our soul salvation, in my opinion, is dependent on it, right? I believe that we're not going to be right as human beings when we harbor all of this self-hatred, hatred of others, fear of ourselves, fear of the future, fear of our economic status. We're not going to be able to conquer this until we conquer our fear of confronting those things in ourselves that are blocking us from the sunlight of God's spirit and the spirit of life and love.
Wow, thank you for that so much, Reverend Attorney Kris Watson. This has been epic. When you mentioned George Floyd, I wrote a book talking about humanity and the progress and situations with that. And I named that book Just an Ordinary George. 8 minutes and 46 seconds. Your denial is your conscience.
Oh, I love.
And because of all the things that you're sharing right now, with the historical perspectives and how people try to overlook the process, that we still have work to do.
We have lots of
You
work
know,
to do.
yeah.
And if you
Yeah.
have a
So
connection to George Floyd's, family and that foundation, I would love for you to connect us, because our work really did originate as a result. And I'm going to tell you what happened to me is that when they had the trial of his murderers, it was Holy Week. And I believe it
yes.
was in 2021 or two. I think it was 2021. Might have been 2022.
Mhm.
I'm telling you that I could not take my eyes off that trial. I was riveted.
Okay.
Especially as
Okay.
an attorney, that's part of I'm a litigator, right? Criminal defense was is my thing. But
Yes.
I was so enraptured, not in a good way, with that
Okay.
trial of his murderers, that literally, and it was during Holy Week, and I was just rocking and weeping and rolling around the floor crying when I was listening to the testimony of the witnesses that saw this happen. And all I could think of was that I was sitting at the foot of the cross, that I really likened it to being at the foot of the cross of Jesus, because it was
Okay.
during Holy Week, and it was devastating to me. And it took me a good while to sort of recover from that. I don't think that I've ever really recovered from it, because it was so brutal and so horrific and so emblematic of how we are seen in the eyes of people who don't look like us, in the eyes of law enforcement. And we have to do something. I mean, we can't go on like this. We cannot. This is not living.
It's not.
I feel passionately about this, like to the point of tears. Like, we cannot continue this way as a society, as human beings on this planet. This is not what the divine intends for us. It just isn't. And if we don't begin to look deeply within our hearts and souls and see the harm that we cause, even unwittingly, the macro and microaggressions, the way that we hurt each other, the way that we hurt ourselves, the way that, white privilege and white supremacy keeps us from flourishing as human beings, then we'll be lost for forever. This is the epic work of our time. I mean, and we have to keep plugging away at it. We have to chip away at it, no matter how painful, no matter how painstaking, no matter how exhausting. We have no choice. If we really want
Absolutely.
real people, we don't have a choice.
We do not. We do not. And
Right.
and wow, listen, you and I are kindred spirits. I'm telling
Yes.
you. And you asked me if George Floyd's uncle, Selwyn Jones, wrote the foreword for me for this book.
Wow.
And we sadly do not embrace the fact that we are standing. And you mentioned the ancestors earlier, is that we're standing on the shoulder of the
Yes.
ancestors, and they didn't
Yes.
go through all of that, for us to be Clarence Thomas, for
Exactly.
us to
Right.
be Tim Scott, for us to be
Exactly.
Candace. They didn't go through all of that for that.
Exactly.
So we have a charge. Okay, now let me let you go. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, you have just enjoyed the Nobody Asked Me Guy show. Guys, as you know, I'm your host, Melvin Casey Lars. We meet most Tuesday nights at 6:00 p.m. And guys, you know how we do it here. So as always, we ask you not only ask yourself, ask your friends to go to YouTube, look up the Nobody Asked Me Guy show, and give us a like and a subscribe. And we do not ask for one dime. We just ask for your support through like and subscribe. So guys, we've had with us Reverend Dr. Kris Watson of the Nurturing Justice. And guys, you need to check that out. It's a fantastic, fantastic program that'll open your eyes and that'll help you grow as an individual. And you can also help your friends grow and your neighbors in your city and your town. So check us out. Now, you can find Kris. She's already told you where you can find her. We'll ask her if she'll mention one last time before we let her off of
Sure.
the broadcast.
Sure, it's Kris, Kris, at nurturingjustice.org. So just email me, hit me up on email if you want to join a group or learn more about our work. We're happy to share with you.
Fantastic, Kris. Thank you very much, and we will talk again.
Okay, blessings. Thank you so much. I'm so grateful for this opportunity.
And we're grateful to have you.
Okay, take care. Talk soon.